we've been talking a lot about imagination today and all of the nice things that we can imagine, but unfortunately, I'll have to bring you back to the reality, and we will be discussing the actual state of communication with the native platforms. And my name is Darja, but in my native language, actually, the way most of my friends know me and call me, it's Dasha, and this makes me name buddies with another small creature, which all of you already know. I'm a Flutterista and a Women Tech Makers ambassador. And I don't know why I'm using my computer if I have the clicker, sorry. Yes, and I started my developer journey as a native Android developer, actually, back in 2015. And then I happily switched to Flutter in the end of 2019, which makes it almost 4 years, I guess. Time flies really fast. And this transition was possible thanks to my work in Chile. I'm currently a mobile tech lead in a Latvian agency. And what we do is we make mobile apps. We started out as a native agency, but we switched to Flutter once we understand that Flutter is something that developers love and clients love. And one such application that we are working on, it's a long-term client, and it's a mobile banking application. And one day they came to us with a request for a feature to be able to add their payment cards to digital wallets such as Apple Pay and Google Pay. The thing is, in order to add a payment card to the wallet, you need to first tokenize it. And usually this is done by special SDKs that specialize in this kind of things. And this was the same for us. The client selected an SDK, they had a contract and so on, and it was all nice and well, until we learned that this SDK was available only for native platforms. And we had no other way except to go down back to the native platforms and write our own wrapper for this SDK. And today I will take you on my journey, how this all happened, what problems we met with MethodChannels, and how were they solved by using Pigeon. But before we do that, can you put your hand up if you have ever worked with MethodChannels or platform channels in general? Okay, wow, that's a lot. Did you like it? No. Okay, and what about Pigeon? Has anyone used it? Okay, much less hands, that's good. I think you will like it more than MethodChannels and platform channels in general. But even if you have never used those, it's not a problem. We will go over the whole thing, so no prior knowledge expected. Okay, and let's discuss a little bit about how, in general, Flutter applications are connected to native platforms. And this Flutter part of the app is usually called the client. And the native part of the app is called the host. And while we're here, a little disclaimer, I will be focusing only on mobile, on Android and iOS, because I do mobile apps. And yes, but those two parts are connected with the help of what is known as a platform channel. And platform channels have different types. One of those types is method channel, which uses a notion of method to communicate between the client and the host. There's also event channels that allow to stream events from host to client. And there's also a basic message channel, which is a bit more abstract version of a channel, and you can pass around any kind of messages between client and the host. And pretty much the same is relevant for iOS. Most of the code goes to app delegate, Android it's main activity, and my examples will be in Kotlin, in main activity, because that's my background, that's where I come from, but I will share a repository with code which has implementation both for iOS and Android, and you can check it out later. That being said, yeah, lighting a little bit too dark, but we will be building an app. I'm really proud of this app because it's a pour generator. So I have 3 cats. Well, actually, my mom has 3 cats. I don't live with them anymore. But I miss them a lot. So sometimes I want to listen to them pouring. So this is an app where I can select a cat and play the sound of their pouring. And the thing is, to play the sound, we need to use native APIs. I'll try to show the demo, but I think the sound doesn't work, but we will try. So let's try with Charlie. Yeah, doesn't want to work. Sorry, but yeah, initially I planned for it to be pouring and we would meditate all together for 40 minutes here and just have a good time. But I guess we'll need to dive into code anyway. And yeah, the functions that this application has is play and stop the sound, loop and don't loop, and continuously show the progress of what we're playing. And we will start out with very, very simple code base. The most of the things will be going on in the main activity for the Android side and the cat player page on the Flutter side. Okay, and how would we implement it in reality? Well, probably the most normal way would be to actually use a plugin, existing plugin. There are good plugins for connecting to a media player on the Android side and the audio session on the iOS side. Another way would be to use MethodChannels, and the best way will be Pigeon, and you will soon understand why. Okay, but let's start with MethodChannels. So step one, in order to connect our Flutter app to our native part of the app, we need to create the channel itself. And this is done the following way in the Dart side. On the Flutter side, what we need to do is we need to create an instance of a class called MethodChannel, and the next important part is we need to give it a name. We then do the same thing on the Kotlin side, on the Swift side, and so on. And the thing is, those two channels have to have exactly the same name, because if they don't, we will get this. We will get the missing plugin exception, because when we try to call methods and the channel names don't match completely, the method will not be found on the native side or on the Dart side, depends on from where you're calling from. So the problems with method channels start like from the very beginning when we haven't even done anything useful yet. So yes, problem number one, missing plugin exception if channel names don't match. But let's say we figured that part out and we managed to spell the channel names correctly and we want to implement some methods. We would do it the following way. We have our channel field, and what we do is we call the function called invoke method and pass, again, a string, which is the name of the function that we're going to call on the native side. And in order to get those calls on the native side, we need to override the method called configure Flutter engine on main activity. And then we need to set up the method call handler for our method channel. And the interesting things happen with these two parameters, the call and result, because the call is where we get the name of the method that's being called from. And again, this name is a string. And back. Yes, this name is a string, and it has to match, again, completely the same way that we called it on the Dart side. And the next parameter is the result, and result is something that we need to 100% call in order for our method to finish. Result is very simple Java interface. It has three methods: success, error, and not implemented. And if you don't call any of them on the native side, then your method on the Flutter side will not finish and you will have problems with that. So we have problem number two. The awaited result won't be returned if we forget to call result. And you would say, well, don't forget to call result. But we are people, and it's, first of all, easy to forget, especially when you are used to some kind of synchronous APIs. And this offers a bit of mind-changing. And another thing is if we, for example, call this twice, in one place we call success and in another we call error, we will get another exception, which is called the illegal state exception, reply already submitted. And this all comes from this result API that we have to use in order to give the result back to the platform. So once again, yes, it's possible to avoid these errors, but it's also very easy to run into them, especially in runtime. Okay, but let's say we figure out how to work with result, and we now want to pass some arguments into our functions and not just call play, but actually pass the name of the file that we want to play, and we want to return some data back. This is what we would do on the Dart side, and I'll give you maybe a second to check out the code. So what we do, again, we call the invoke method on the channel, we specify the name of the method on the native side, and we pass a map of parameters. And then we await the result, and if the result is true, and we can check for that because result is actually dynamic, then we will update the UI on the Flutter side. So let's say we managed to spell loop correctly, and we match the functions on the Flutter and on the native side, and we want to check this argument. Where will the code go next? To if or to else? Put your hands up if you think to if. Okay, to else. Okay, so very shy. I see some trying to put your hands up. Well, if you take a look, we pass the parameter, which is called isLooping on the Flutter side and looping on the Kotlin side, and they will not match. IsLooping will be null, and we will end up here. Even though technically we think on the Flutter side that we have specified everything correctly and the code is compiling and everything works. So this is one of the main problems when working with method channels. Passing around strings as parameter, as function names, as everything. And it's very easy to run into those problems, especially in the during runtime, because everything will compile and seem correct until you actually run the code. And it was very easy for me to prepare this part of the talk because I actually run into all of those errors myself while I was doing the method channel implementation, because I'm usually used to compiler telling me something is wrong and not rechecking whether I said is looping or looping. And yes, because the result will be an error, the result will never be true, and we will never update the UI, but also even if the looping parameter is specified correctly, we will still go into else, result, success, pass null. It will still not be true and will still not update the UI. So here there's also no type matching, and it's very easy to make more errors, more bugs. We love them. So yes, and if something doesn't match, we will get a platform exception that requires parameter is null due to name mismatch. And many other kinds of platform exceptions, depending on what exactly went wrong with the type. So far, our experience with working with method channels wasn't exactly positive, right? But when you come to think about it, we were working with languages such as Dart, Swift, and Kotlin, and there are many things that unite them. Flutter, for example. But what is more important is that all of those are statically typed languages, which means that we know the types of the variables. Well, in Dart, we can do dynamic, but the types of the variables are known at compile time, and we can work safely with different data types of different variables and be sure that what we expect from our code is happening in our code in terms of types. So we started thinking and researching, well, Googling, is there a better way to do this inter-channel communication between the platforms? And pigeons have been used as message carriers for longest time, for more than 3,000 years already, by ancient people and by people during wars, and even today there is still a possibility if something goes wrong to use pigeons, because pigeons have an innate ability to remember where they came from, where they live, and to deliver the messages back to that place. And even though we can think that this is like an old method of communication and we don't need pigeons to solve our communication problems, well, in Flutter, in fact, we can use pigeons. And Pigeon is a code generation library for making the communication between the Flutter and the native platforms type-safe and much more enjoyable for the developers. So how does Pigeon work? Well, 3 easy steps. We need to describe an interface in Dart. Then we need to run the Pigeon code generator. And then we need to set up the Dart and native calls. So let's take a look at that. Step 1, we need to configure the host interface. So can you see it? Yes, Pigeon works with annotations, and we create a file in Dart, and we describe an interface which we will be using from the Dart side, and based on this interface, the pigeon will generate code for the native side too. And we specified that the interface with the host API annotation, and there's also one special parameter called Dart host test handler, which we can use in order to generate test implementation too, but we will talk about a bit later. And yes, so we describe the interface that we want. So we want media player API, which has 3 methods: play, stop, and loop. And we want to pass a class called media file to the play a method. And this is where the first limitation of Pigeon comes in, because we can only, I did a mistake in my slide. Actually, the yellow thing should be on the import. So the only import that we can use in this file is the Pigeon library itself. So every data class that you need to use that in your interface has to be specified in this same file, and you also can't choose any other libraries. So if you need equality overriding or something like that, you also need to implement that yourself. Because if you don't, and you try to import a library and you run the Pigeon code generator, you will get an issue that unsupported import, because only Pigeon is supported. But OK, let's say we specified all of the code in our file, and we now want to generate interface from that, real code that we're going to use from that. For that, there is also configuration options. In the very same file, we need to use the annotation called configure pigeon. And in here, we can specify which files to generate where, like if we want to support Kotlin, if we want to support Swift, and testing, and so on. So this should be full paths. So I omitted them for brevity, but yes, these are full paths where the code that we will be using will be generated to. And then we run the command, and we need to pass one argument, which is the file with the interface that we have just described. And when we run the code generator, we get this output. This was the original file that we have created with the host API annotation, and these 4 is what was generated by Pigeon. We have Android, we have iOS, we have the Dart interface, and also an interface for testing. So to sum this up, what we have done so far is we have generated Dart, Kotlin, Swift, and test APIs based on the interface description in our original file. And what this has done is no magic, actually, unfortunately. I'm not Slava, I don't know how to do magic. And the code that Pigeon has generated is very readable, and it uses basic MethodChannels under the hood. It's completely almost the same thing as we would write ourselves, but it removes all of the boilerplate, and we don't need to use those APIs ourselves. And now that we have the generated code, we need to connect the client, the Flutter application, and the host native platform. And before, we did that with the help of MethodChannels. Now we won't, because now we have a Dart file, a Dart class called Media Player API that was generated for us, and we can use that instead without passing around strings. Let's see how to do that. Step 1, we need to import the generated file into the class that we're going to use it in. Then we need to create an instance of this interface. In our case, it's Media Player API. For demo, of course, I'm creating it in place. In real world, you would inject it, do proper state management, and all of those things. But for demo, this will do. And when we want to now call the play function, we just call play as we would do with play in Dart code, because this is play in Dart code. We pass instance of media file because it's a Dart class, and everything from this perspective, we don't even know that there's any native communication going under the hood because it's all Dart for us. Now back on the native side, this is Kotlin, and in Kotlin, this is a syntax to implement something. So we need to implement the interface, which was also generated for us by Pigeon. Instead of the method call handler, we don't need to set that up anymore. We just need to call the setup function of the generated class and pass the instance of it. Because we are implementing it in main activity, it will be this. And now we can just override the functions as if it was, because we're implementing the interface, and this is pure Kotlin code. There's no strings, there's no results, not anything like that. And we have, again, media file, we can return booleans and so on and so forth, and it's all Kotlin. So, with Pigeon, we have eliminated the missing plugin exception. We have got rid of the results exceptions and problems potential. And we have also eliminated a lot of possible platform exceptions. But if you do need some async operation on the native side, you can still return it, but you have to do it explicitly by adding the async annotation to your method. And what it will do, it will pass this callback as a parameter, and then you can, again, call success, error, and so on, in case you need to do that. Because I think this distinction of making it explicitly async makes the developer much more mindful of what they're doing and what APIs they're using. So, how does Pigeon ensure type safety? How can we use this media file class that we have written? But we need to think about first, how do we translate one type, for example, integer in Dart, to integer in Kotlin? And there are many ways. For example, we could do some JSON manipulation and just pass around again strings, decode and encode JSON. But platform channels have a special API called codec, and there are two main codecs, which is method codec and message codec, but they boil down to two methods, encoding and decoding. So we encode on one side, we send it over, and we decode it on the other side. And method channels use the standard method codec, and the problem with standard method codec is that it supports a very limited amount of types. So we have to support null on in every language, and then there's also some primitives like booleans, numbers, and some basic collections. But if you want to go further and use custom classes in case of method channels, what we would need to do, is either do some JSON manipulation, so translate it to JSON, for example, or to any other encoding format, and then we need to transfer it into byte, which also makes it a bit slower, or we can write a custom codec, but we would need to also do it manually and write the encoding logic for all of our custom classes, which Pigeon does. It also uses the standard message codec, but based on the classes that we have described in the initial file, it itself generates extensions, so we don't have to. And we can use those classes as they are, and be sure that media file on Flutter is media file on Kotlin. And does it work both ways? Can we also call method channels from host to client? And yes, it does. Again, you describe the interface in Dart, run Pigeon code generator, set up Dart and native calls, and you're good to go. And steps are very similar to what we have done with Host API, except that you use the Flutter API annotation and do a little bit the steps in reverse. And we won't be looking at this anymore because that's basically the same code almost, but you can see the full implementation in the repository, which I will share with you in the end. And one more thing which Pigeon is good at is, well, not good, but better at, is error handling. And it enhances error handling in the following ways. All of the native calls are wrapped with try-catch, and you can expect only platform exception from the Flutter side, so you'll note that no matter what happens, you will get only platform exceptions. And if you want to throw platform exceptions from the native side, there's also a convenience class called Flutter error, which offers some fields which will be mapped in a predictable way, so you can be always sure that it's them. So now our usage of platform channels has become much more nicer with the help of the Pigeon tool generator. But is it a silver bullet, and does it solve all of the problems with native communication? And obviously, if I'm asking, then it's not. First of all, main limitation is that there is no support for even channels, because then if you use even channels, you have to continue using them, and Pigeon currently doesn't generate any code for that. All of the code has to be specified in the single file, as we have seen so far. And currently, there's also limited support for enums and inheritance. There are many details. So until just recently, it wasn't possible to return enums and pass them as parameters to functions, but just like literally a couple of days ago, a new version of Pigeon was released, and it adds primitive enum support. So I'm sure that all of those limitations with time will also be eliminated. So to sum this up, type safety is our friend. It makes our code safer and more enjoyable to write. And it's better to catch errors during compile time and not during runtime. Pigeon helps with all of that because it introduces type safety, lays a boilerplate, much more happiness for the developers, much faster development itself, and much less bugs. And always remember to ask yourself when you're doing something and you feel it's uncomfortable, is there a better way to do it? Because if not, then research it until you're satisfied with the answer. We went from being not happy working with platform channels to being much more happier, and that's not because the cat wants to eat the pigeon. Okay, thank you. And there's a small feedback form. It will take you 15 seconds, after which you will find the repository, and thank you. And dance, I guess, while we wait for Lucas. Probably enjoying his fika while we're all talking about Pigeon here. Welcome back.
All right, thank you. I was totally not zoning out there. They look happy still, so I suspect your talk was great.
I hope so. We'll check the quiz later, so I'll tell you the answer.
Oh, the quiz. There was a quiz.
No, the feedback form.
Feedback form, yes. Maybe it is a quiz. Like you can only answer one of them is right. All right, let's go with some questions. We have one from Bornold. Is there any way to implement event channels in Pigeon?
No. As I said, there's no. No, wait, not yet. I think I've seen either issues or, I think not pull requests, but issues definitely on the Pigeon repository. So it in the pipeline, I guess, sometime in the future, but not currently.
All right, thank you. What was it like to migrate existing MethodChannels API to Pigeon?
Because we didn't have that many methods, and even not those many methods were already a pain. I was very happy to finally get rid of those and write proper code.
That makes sense. From Thomas, do you see any reason to use message channel instead of Pigeon?
Probably if you have maybe very simple single call and you don't want to set up the whole thing, but I would probably go for Pigeon every time, but I'm biased.
Nice. Is it possible by Pigeon to execute native and Is it possible by Pigeon execute native and establish communication with code on C++ on the Android side?
It supports C++. I'm not sure how it's going to work with Android, possibly, but I'm not sure. Not really. It generate well. It still has to support the existing platform channel communication. So whatever is possible with platform channel is possible with Pigeon, and not more. It just offers like this wrapper around it.
Right. Can we use enums with standard message codec?
Yes. I think previously it was that you could only use enums inside of the classes that you've written, but now with this latest support, I think you can also use them as return types from functions in general and also as arguments into functions.
That's nice. Can you use event channels?
No, no, you can't.
People really want to know. Can you use Pigeon along with standard method channels?
Yes, you can use both. The same way as you would use like many method channels, you can use Pigeon too, because it just generates codes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was all the questions we have. And now, if I have read my own schedule correctly now is the actual fika, and it will be half an hour. So give an applause to Darja.